The first gunshot that echoed across the Montana prairie made Eliza Sinclair flinch so violently she nearly tumbled from the stagecoach bench. She clutched her worn leather valise tighter against her chest, as if the meager possessions inside might shield her from whatever dangers awaited in the frontier town looming on the horizon. Timber Creek, Montana Territory, 1878, the place where a man named Victor Prescott had promised her a new beginning, a respectable life as his wife. A man she had never met. "First time out west, miss." The stagecoach driver glanced back at her, amusement crinkling the corners of his weathered eyes. "Is it that obvious?" Eliza asked, trying to steady her breathing as another shot rang out, followed by raucous laughter from somewhere in the town. "Most Easterners jump at their own shadows the first few weeks," he said with a chuckle. "Don't worry, miss. Timber Creek ain't so bad as some places. Just Saturday night high spirits." High spirits that involved firearms, Eliza thought grimly. She straightened her spine and adjusted her bonnet, determined not to appear as terrified as she felt. At 22, she had left behind everything familiar: the crowded Boston tenements, the endless factory work, and the grim specter of destitution that had shadowed her since her parents' deaths. The advertisement in the Matrimonial Gazette had seemed like divine providence. Successful rancher seeks educated, respectable wife. Passage paid. Victor Prescott's letters had painted a picture of prosperity and promise. A thriving cattle ranch, a comfortable home, a respectable position in the community as his wife. Security, the one thing Eliza had craved more than anything. The stagecoach rolled down Timber Creek's Main Street, a dusty thoroughfare lined with false-fronted buildings, hitching posts, and more saloons than Eliza could count. Men in wide-brimmed hats turned to stare as the coach passed, their gazes lingering on her in a way that made her skin prickle with unease. "Where can I find Mr. Victor Prescott?" she asked as the driver pulled the team to a halt outside the town's modest hotel. The man's expression changed, sympathy replacing his earlier amusement. "Prescott, you best talk to Sheriff Wells down at the jailhouse." "The jailhouse?" Eliza's heart sank. "Why would I need to speak with the sheriff? Just ask for Wells, miss. He'll explain." The driver hopped down and offered her a hand. "Best of luck to you." With trembling legs, Eliza stepped onto Montana soil for the first time. The air smelled of dust, horses, and wood smoke, nothing like Boston's coal-tinged fog. She stood alone on the boardwalk, clutching her valise in one hand and the handle of her trunk in the other, as the stagecoach rattled away. A tall, broad-shouldered man emerged from the Mercantile across the street, his eyes settling on her with unmistakable recognition. He crossed toward her, removing his hat to reveal hair the color of wheat fields. His face was tanned from the sun, with lines etched around his eyes that spoke of squinting into long distances. "Miss Sinclair." His voice was deep, with a slight rasp that suggested he didn't use it often. "Yes." Eliza's grip tightened on her valise. "Vaughn Parker," he said, extending a calloused hand. "I'm afraid I have some difficult news." "Where is Mr. Prescott?" she asked, not taking his hand. Vaughn Parker's expression softened. "Victor Prescott passed away 3 weeks ago. Pneumonia took him fast." The world seemed to tilt beneath Eliza's feet. "But he sent for me. I have his letters promising," she broke off, reality crashing down around her. "Oh God, what am I to do now? That's why I'm here, madam. I was Victor's neighbor. He asked me to look after things if you arrived." He cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Truth is, Miss Sinclair, Victor wasn't exactly forthright in his correspondence." "What do you mean?" "The ranch he wrote about, it's not much more than a run-down cabin and 50 acres of questionable grazing land. He borrowed against it so many times the bank's ready to foreclose. Vaughn shifted his weight, looking at her directly. He was deep in debt, Miss Sinclair. There's nothing left. Eliza's legs gave way and she sank onto her trunk, her mind reeling. He promised, he said. The letters, read and reread until they were creased and soft, had described prosperity and security. What am I to do? I spent everything I had on supplies for the journey. Vaughn Parker knelt before her, his blue eyes meeting hers. I made a promise to Victor before he died, told him I'd make sure you were taken care of if you came. I don't need charity, Mr. Parker. It's not charity I'm offering, Miss Sinclair. He stood and replaced his hat, his expression resolute. Victor broke every promise he made to you. I intend to keep mine to him. I've arranged a room for you at the hotel while you decide what you want to do. And what are my options exactly? Eliza asked, her voice sharper than she intended. You could take the next stage east, he said, though I reckon you wouldn't have asked about that if you had anywhere to go back to. Or, he hesitated, seeming to choose his words carefully. My sister runs the schoolhouse. She's been looking for someone to help with the younger children. It wouldn't be much, but it would give you time to figure things out. The kindness in his offer only made Eliza's humiliation sting more sharply. She had come west to be a wife, not a charity case. And where will I live? In your cabin, Mr. Parker. A flush crept up his neck. No, madam. There's a small room behind the schoolhouse. It's modest, but it's private. Eliza stared at the dusty street, the rough-hewn buildings, the strangers passing by with curious glances. Her dreams of security and a respectable married life had evaporated in an instant. Yet the alternative, returning east in defeat, with no job and no family to welcome her, was unthinkable. Very well, Mr. Parker. I accept your offer, temporarily. She rose to her feet, struggling to maintain her dignity. But I want to see Mr. Prescott's property first. Perhaps things aren't as dire as you suggest. A ghost of a smile touched Vaughn's lips. As you wish, Miss Sinclair. We can ride out tomorrow. He lifted her trunk with ease. For tonight, let's get you settled. As they walked toward the hotel, Eliza felt the weight of stares from the saloon across the street. Women in brightly colored dresses lounged on the balcony, their painted faces watching her with a mixture of curiosity and pity. Don't mind them, Vaughn said quietly. Folks don't see many proper Eastern ladies in Timber Creek. I'm hardly a lady, Mr. Parker, just a factory girl who was foolish enough to believe in promises made on paper. Out here, Miss Sinclair, it's not where you came from that matters. It's what you do now that you're here. He pushed open the hotel door for her. Rest tonight. Tomorrow's soon enough to face what comes next. Alone in the small hotel room, Eliza finally allowed her tears to fall. She had gambled everything on Victor Prescott's promises, her savings, her reputation, her future. Now she was stranded in a frontier town with nothing but a trunk full of wedding clothes and household linens she would never use. She unfolded Victor's last letter, tracing the words that had sealed her fate. I promise you'll never want for anything as my wife. You'll have security and respect as Mrs. Prescott of Timber Creek. The handwriting was bold and confident, just like the lies it conveyed. Outside her window, the sounds of the frontier night rose like a strange melody piano music from the saloon, bursts of laughter, the occasional shout. So different from Boston's crowded tenements with their crying babies and coughing consumptives. For better or worse, this was her world now. She would not surrender to despair. Eliza washed her face, rebraided her dark hair, and crawled into the narrow bed. Tomorrow she would see the reality of Victor Prescott's broken promises with her own eyes. Then she would begin building something new from the wreckage of her dreams. Dawn broke crisp and clear over Timber Creek. the eastern sky painted in strokes of pink and gold that took Eliza's breath away, despite her troubled thoughts. She dressed carefully in her plainest traveling suit and descended to the hotel's small dining room, where Vaughn Parker waited at a corner table. "Sleep well, Miss Sinclair?" he asked, rising as she approached. "Well enough, thank you." She sat across from him, noting the way other diners glanced their way with undisguised curiosity. "I've arranged for breakfast," Vaughn said, gesturing to the waitress who promptly brought steaming plates of eggs, bacon, and biscuits. "We've got a fair ride ahead of us." Eliza picked at her food, her appetite diminished by anxiety. "Tell me about Mr. Prescott, Mr. Parker. What kind of man was he?" Vaughn's face grew guarded. Victor was complicated, charming when he wanted to be, full of big ideas and bigger talk. He took a sip of coffee. "Not a bad man, just one who saw the world as he wished it to be rather than how it was." "A dreamer," Eliza said softly. "A dreamer who borrowed against those dreams until there was nothing left," Vaughn corrected. "I don't mean to speak ill of the dead, Miss Sinclair, but you deserve the truth." "Yes, I believe I've had quite enough pretty lies." Eliza straightened her shoulders. "How far is the property?" "About an hour's ride. I've arranged a gentle mare for you. Can you ride?" "I grew up in Boston tenements, Mr. Parker." "The closest I've come to riding was watching the milk wagons pass." For the first time, a genuine smile transformed Vaughn's serious face. "Then it seems I'll be giving you your first riding lesson, Miss Sinclair." After breakfast, they walked to the livery stable where two horses waited, a tall, muscular chestnut for Vaughn and a smaller, dappled gray mare for Eliza. "This is Daisy," Vaughn said, running his hand along the mare's neck. "Gentlest horse in the county. She'll take good care of you." With patient instruction, he showed Eliza how to mount, how to hold the reins, and the basics of guiding the horse. Despite her nervousness, Eliza found herself enjoying the new experience, especially when Daisy responded so willingly to her tentative commands. They rode out of Timber Creek at a slow walk, Eliza gradually growing more confident in the saddle. The Montana landscape unfolded before them, rolling hills covered in prairie grass that rippled like a golden sea in the morning breeze, stands of cottonwoods following the meandering path of a distant creek, and far to the west, the hazy silhouettes of mountains. "It's beautiful," Eliza breathed, overwhelmed by the vastness of it. "Different from Boston, I expect," Vaughn said, riding alongside her in every possible way. She gestured to the open country. "There's so much space. In Boston, the buildings press in so close you can almost touch your neighbor's window from your own. Space can be lonely," Vaughn remarked. "That's why community matters so much out here. We look after our own." "Is that why you're helping me? Because you consider me one of your own now?" "I'm helping you because I gave my word," he replied simply, as if that explained everything. They rode in companionable silence for a time, the rhythm of the horses' hooves a soothing counterpoint to Eliza's turbulent thoughts. She studied Vaughn Parker from the corner of her eye, noting the straight line of his back, the quiet confidence with which he rode. Unlike the smooth, talking Victor of her imagination, Vaughn seemed a man of few words but definite action. "Tell me about your ranch, Mr. Parker," she said as they forded a shallow stream. "It's modest compared to some, but it's solid. 200 acres, mostly grazing land. A good herd of shorethorns, about 60 head. Cabins small but sound." Pride tinged his voice. "Built it myself 5 years ago when I came out from Pennsylvania." "What brought you west?" "Same thing that brings most men, I suppose. Opportunity. A chance to build something that's truly mine." He glanced at her. "What about you, Miss Sinclair? What made you answer Victor's advertisement?" Eliza considered deflecting the question, but something about the open country made her equally open with her response. Security. After my parents died of influenza, I supported myself in a textile mill. 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, in air so thick with cotton dust you could barely breathe. She shuddered at the memory. When the mill closed last winter, I found work as a seamstress, but the pay barely covered room and board. So Victor's promises sounded like salvation, Vaughn concluded. Yes. Eliza's throat tightened. Foolish, wasn't it, to stake everything on a stranger's words? Hope isn't foolish, Miss Sinclair, neither is courage, and it took both to come all this way on your own. His kind assessment warmed her, despite her determination to remain practical. That's the property ahead, she asked, noticing a small, weathered cabin perched on a gentle rise. That's it, the Prescott place. Vaughn's tone held no mockery, only a certain solemnity. As they drew closer, Eliza's heart sank. The cabin was tiny, its porch sagging, the small corral beside it containing no animals. A few stunted crops struggled in a garden patch, overgrown with weeds. This was the thriving ranch Victor had described so eloquently. The comfortable home he had promised to provide. Vaughn dismounted and helped her down from Daisy. I know it's not what you were expecting, he said quietly. No, Eliza whispered, fighting back tears. It's not. Inside, the cabin was hardly better, a single room with a rustic bed, a table, 2 chairs, and a small cast iron stove. A thin layer of dust covered everything. On the table lay papers, bank notices, overdue bills, and a half-finished letter addressed to Eliza herself. She picked it up with trembling hands. My dearest Eliza, it began, I fear I have not been entirely truthful with you. The confession continued, explaining how his dreams had outpaced his means, how debts had mounted, how illness had weakened him before he could make things right. The letter ended mid-sentence, as if death had claimed him before he could complete his final apology. He was going to tell me the truth, Eliza said, placing the letter back on the table. Victor had his faults, but he wasn't without conscience. Vaughn stood awkwardly in the doorway. The bank will take possession next week. I wanted you to see it first, so you'd understand the situation. Eliza walked to the small window, gazing out at the stark beauty of the Montana prairie. Even in its run-down state, there was something compelling about this place, a sense of possibility that had never existed for her in Boston's crowded streets. What would it take, she asked slowly, to save this place from foreclosure? Vaughn's eyebrows rose in surprise. You can't be serious. I'm entirely serious, Mr. Parker. How much is owed? Nearly $200. But Miss Sinclair, even if you had that kind of money, which I presume you don't, I don't, she admitted. This land barely supports itself. The soil's poor for farming, and there's not enough grazing for a decent herd. Victor was always just one good season away from prosperity, but that season never came. Eliza turned from the window, meeting his concerned gaze. Then I suppose I should accept your offer of the teaching position. At least until I can earn enough for a ticket east. Relief crossed Vaughn's features. My sister will be pleased. She's been teaching 40 children across 8 grades by herself. As they rode back to Timber Creek, Eliza found herself strangely more at peace than she had been since arriving. The dream of becoming Mrs. Prescott was dead, but at least now she knew the truth. Whatever came next would be built on reality, not fantasy. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a modest white clapboard building with a small bell tower. Behind it, separated by a narrow garden, was a tiny cottage that would be Eliza's new home. As they approached, a woman emerged from the schoolhouse, tall and slender like Vaughn, with the same wheat-colored hair but softer features. Vaughn, you're back. She hurried toward them, her smile warm and curious as she looked at Eliza. "And you must be Miss Sinclair." "Eliza, this is my sister, Sarah Parker," Vaughn said as he helped Eliza dismount. "I'm so pleased to meet you," Sarah said, clasping Eliza's hands in her own. "Vaughn told me about your situation. I can't tell you how grateful I am that you're willing to help with the school." "I should be thanking you for the opportunity," Eliza replied, liking Sarah immediately. "Though I should warn you, my only teaching experience was helping younger children in the tenements learn their letters." "That's more experience than I had when I started," Sarah laughed. "Come, let me show you the cottage. It's small, but I've tried to make it comfortable." The cottage was indeed tiny, a single room with a curtained-off sleeping area, a small stove, a table with 2 chairs, and a bookshelf lined with well-worn volumes. Yet it was clean and cheerful, with curtains at the windows and a colorful quilt on the narrow bed. "It's lovely," Eliza said sincerely, placing her valise on the table. "I'll bring your trunk," Vaughn offered, disappearing back to where they had left the horses. Sarah watched her brother go, then turned to Eliza with a kind but direct gaze. "Vaughn told me about Victor's deception." "I'm truly sorry. Thank you," Eliza sighed. "It seems I'm to be the subject of local pity, the mail-order bride who arrived to find her groom dead and his promises empty." "Nonsense," Sarah declared firmly. "You'll be known as the Eastern lady who faced adversity with dignity and made a place for herself. Timber Creek respects strength, Miss Sinclair. Please call me Eliza." "Eliza, then." Sarah smiled. "School begins at 8 o'clock sharp on Monday. I have 43 students ranging from 6 to 16 years. You'll help with the younger children reading, writing, and basic arithmetic." "Think you can manage that?" "I believe I can," Eliza said, more confident than she felt. "Excellent. Now, I've arranged for you to take meals with us until you get settled. Vaughn's cabin is just outside town, but I have rooms above the schoolhouse. We'll expect you for supper at 6. When Sarah left to prepare for evening classes, Vaughn returned with Eliza's trunk. He set it down and stood awkwardly in the center of the small room, his hat in his hands. "Thank you," Eliza said softly, "for everything." "I haven't done much," he replied, his gaze dropping to his hat. "You've given me a chance, Mr. Parker. That's more than most would do for a stranger." "Vaughn," he corrected. "If you're on a first-name basis with my sister, you might as well use mine too." "Vaughn," she repeated, testing the name. "Your sister has invited me to supper. She says you live outside town, about a mile west, close enough to be neighborly, far enough for peace." He settled his hat back on his head. "I'll come by at 5:30 to escort you. These streets can be rough after dark." After he left, Eliza unpacked her few belongings, hanging her dresses on hooks behind the curtained sleeping area and arranging her small collection of books on the shelf. Her wedding dress, a simple blue wool that had consumed a month's wages, she folded carefully and placed in the trunk. Perhaps someday it would serve its purpose, though that day seemed impossibly distant now. By the time Vaughn returned to escort her to supper, Eliza had washed away the dust of travel and changed into a fresh shirtwaist and skirt. She had even managed to coax water from the cottage's temperamental pump and rinse her hair, which now hung in a simple braid down her back. "You look—" Vaughn cleared his throat. "Rested." "Thank you," she replied, noting how different he looked without trail dust covering his clothes. He'd clearly made an effort as well, with a clean shirt and his hair still damp from washing. Supper was a simple but abundant meal: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. Sarah kept the conversation flowing, telling stories about Timber Creek's colorful residents and the challenges of frontier education. Eliza found herself laughing for the first time since arriving in Montana. Most of the children are eager to learn, Sarah explained, but school often takes second place to ranch work, especially during calving and harvest. The older boys sometimes disappear for weeks when their families need help. And the girls? Eliza asked. Some families still believe a girl doesn't need more than basic reading and figures, Sarah admitted. But I'm changing that, one parent at a time. Even the most stubborn fathers are starting to see the value in an educated daughter. Sarah's something of a crusader, Vaughn said with obvious pride. She's got half the county convinced that learning Shakespeare is as important as branding cattle. Only half, Sarah teased. I must be slipping. As the evening progressed, Eliza observed the easy affection between the siblings. They clearly depended on each other, yet there was a gentle tension, two unspoken words and meaningful glances that suggested deeper currents. Sarah was engaged last year, Vaughn explained later as he walked Eliza back to her cottage under a star-filled sky. Fellow named Michael Ellis, school teacher from Denver. What happened? Eliza asked. City life called him back. Said he couldn't imagine spending his life in a backwater like Timber Creek. Vaughn's voice hardened. Sarah pretends she's made peace with it, but you haven't, Eliza finished for him. Man gives his word, he should keep it, that's all. His expression softened as he looked down at her. You'll be all right here, Eliza. The door has a good lock, but if you need anything, Sarah's just across the garden. I'll be fine, she assured him, suddenly aware of how tall he was, how broad his shoulders appeared in the moonlight. Thank you for the escort, Vaughn. He tipped his hat and waited until she was safely inside with the door locked before she heard his footsteps retreating. Eliza leaned against the door, her heart beating a little faster than it should. The intensity in Vaughn Parker's blue eyes when he spoke of keeping one's word had stirred something unexpected within her, a flicker of admiration, and perhaps something warmer. She shook her head at her own foolishness. The last thing she needed was to develop tender feelings for another Montana man, especially one who had only offered help out of obligation to a dead friend. No, she would focus on establishing herself, on earning enough to secure her independence. Romance had no place in her practical plans for survival. Yet as she prepared for bed in her tiny new home, Eliza couldn't help but contrast Vaughn's straightforward honesty with Victor's elaborate deceptions. A man gives his word, he should keep it, Vaughn had said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. Perhaps in his world it was. Sunday passed quietly as Eliza settled into her cottage and prepared for her first day of teaching. Sarah lent her several school books and outlined the lessons for the younger children. By Monday morning, Eliza felt a mixture of nervousness and anticipation as she walked the short path to the schoolhouse. The building was already buzzing with activity when she arrived, children of various ages playing in the yard, parents delivering younger ones with admonitions to behave, older students lounging against the fence with studied nonchalance. All activity paused momentarily as Eliza approached, curious eyes taking in the newcomer. Miss Sinclair, Sarah called from the schoolhouse steps. Come meet your pupils. The morning passed in a whirlwind of introductions and assessments. Eliza worked with the youngest children in one corner of the schoolroom while Sarah handled the older students. By noon, Eliza's voice was hoarse from reading primers, and her skirt was dusted with chalk, but she felt a surprising sense of accomplishment. You're a natural, Sarah declared during the lunch break as the children ate in the schoolyard. The little ones are already adoring you. They're wonderful children, Eliza said, watching a group of girls playing jump rope. So eager to learn, despite having so many other responsibilities at home. That's frontier life, Sarah nodded. Children grow up fast when every pair of hands is needed for survival. The afternoon lessons went equally well, and by the time the last student departed, Eliza felt a bone-deep exhaustion mingled with satisfaction. She had found useful work, a purpose beyond simply waiting for rescue or return. As the days passed, Eliza settled into a rhythm. Mornings and afternoons were filled with teaching. Evenings she often spent with Sarah, planning lessons or simply enjoying each other's company. Vaughn visited regularly, usually bringing fresh meat or vegetables from his garden, sometimes staying for supper. Eliza learned that Vaughn had come west after the Civil War, seeking land and independence after years of fighting. He rarely spoke of his wartime experiences, but Sarah confided that he had served with distinction in the Union Army, returning home wounded in body and spirit. "The ranch saved him," Sarah explained one evening as they washed dishes together. "Having something to build, to nurture it gave him purpose when he had none. He seems so self-contained," Eliza observed, "as if he needs nothing and no one." Sarah's laugh was gentle. "My brother is the most stubborn man in Montana territory, and he'd rather eat horseshoes than admit to needing help. But he's also the most reliable person you'll ever meet. If Vaughn Parker gives his word, you can stake your life on it." That quality became increasingly apparent as autumn advanced toward winter. Whenever a repair was needed at the schoolhouse or Eliza's cottage, Vaughn appeared with tools and materials. When an early snowstorm threatened, he arrived with extra firewood and supplies. Never making a fuss, never lingering for praise, just quietly ensuring their comfort and safety, Eliza found herself watching for his visits, her pulse quickening at the sound of his horse approaching. She told herself it was merely gratitude she felt, appreciation for his kindness. But when their hands accidentally brushed as he passed her a cup of coffee, the jolt that ran through her suggested something far more complicated. October brought the Harvest Festival, a community celebration that transformed Timber Creek's Main Street into a festive gathering place. Tables groaned with food, a makeshift dance floor was constructed in front of the general store, and even the most isolated ranching families made the journey to town. "You'll come, of course," Sarah told Eliza as they dismissed the children early on festival day. "Everyone will expect to see the new teacher." "I haven't anything suitable to wear," Eliza protested, thinking of her practical teaching dresses and the wedding gown she couldn't bear to use. "Nonsense. You can borrow my blue dress, the one with the lace collar. It will need taking in at the waist, but you're handy with a needle." By evening, Eliza found herself standing at the edge of the dance floor, wearing Sarah's altered dress and feeling oddly conspicuous. The townspeople had been welcoming enough over the past weeks, but she still felt like an outsider, the abandoned mail-order bride who had stayed on as the schoolteacher's helper. "Miss Sinclair," Sheriff Wells approached, tipping his hat. "Glad to see you settling in with us." "Thank you, Sheriff. Everyone has been very kind." "Not everyone gets a second chance," he said cryptically. "Prescott wasn't what you expected, but perhaps what you found instead will prove better in the long run." Before Eliza could respond to this philosophical observation, the sheriff was called away to settle a dispute at the cider barrel. Left alone again, she watched the dancers, married couples, courting youngsters, even a few of her students being twirled by patient fathers. "Would you care to dance?" Eliza turned to find Vaughn beside her, looking uncommonly handsome in a clean shirt and vest, his usually unruly hair tamed for the occasion. "I don't know the steps," she admitted. "Neither do half the men out there," he replied with a rare smile. "That doesn't stop them from trying." The music shifted to a slower waltz, and Vaughn led her onto the floor. His hand at her waist was warm and steady, guiding her through the unfamiliar steps with surprising grace for such a powerfully built man. "You dance well for a rancher," Eliza remarked, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach. "My mother insisted all her sons learn, said it was as important as knowing how to shoot straight." A shadow crossed his face. "She didn't live to see any of us dance at our weddings, though." "I'm sorry," Eliza said softly. "Have your brothers married?" "Two have. James is in California with his wife and 3 children. Thomas returned to Pennsylvania after the war, married his childhood sweetheart." He guided her through a turn. "What about you?" "Was Victor the first man you considered marrying?" "The only one," Eliza admitted. "In Boston, my options were limited. Factory girls don't often attract respectable suitors." "Their loss," Vaughn said simply, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her miss a step. He steadied her easily, his hand tightening briefly at her waist. For a moment, Eliza imagined leaning into that strength, allowing herself to depend on someone after so many years of fierce self-reliance. The thought terrified her. "Thank you for the dance," she said as the music ended, stepping back quickly. "I should check on Sarah." She fled to the refreshment table, her cheeks burning, her thoughts in disarray. What was happening to her carefully constructed defenses? She had come to Montana seeking security through marriage, only to be betrayed by Victor's false promises. She couldn't risk her heart again so soon, especially not with a man who had helped her out of obligation rather than affection. The evening continued with more dancing, speeches from the mayor, and enough food to feed Timber Creek twice over. Eliza mingled dutifully, accepting compliments on her teaching from parents and deflecting gentle inquiries about her plans from curious matrons. "Will you be staying on permanently, Miss Sinclair?" Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, asked with barely disguised interest. "Or do you intend to return east eventually?" "I haven't decided," Eliza replied truthfully. "For now, I'm grateful for the teaching position." "Such a shame about Victor Prescott," Mrs. Henderson continued, lowering her voice. "Though between us, dear, you may have had a fortunate escape. Victor was charming, certainly, but not the most reliable gentleman." "So I've gathered," Eliza said stiffly. Now Vaughn Parker, on the other hand, Mrs. Henderson's meaningful glance toward where Vaughn stood talking with several ranchers made her intent clear. "There's a man who stands by his word. Never married, you know, though not for lack of interested parties." "Mrs. Henderson, no need to blush, dear. It's only natural for a young woman to consider her prospects, especially in a place where eligible men outnumber ladies so dramatically." She patted Eliza's arm. "Just an observation, nothing more." The conversation left Eliza unsettled. Were her growing feelings for Vaughn so obvious that even the town gossips had noticed? And what of his feelings? He had shown her kindness, certainly, but that might stem solely from his promise to Victor. As the festival wound down and families began the journey home, Eliza found herself walking back to her cottage beside Vaughn, who had insisted on escorting both her and Sarah. "Did you enjoy the festival?" he asked as they lagged slightly behind Sarah. "Very much," Eliza replied. "It's different from Boston's celebrations, more personal somehow. Out here, community isn't just a word, it's survival," Vaughn said. "We depend on each other through blizzards and droughts, sickness and health. Like marriage vows," Eliza observed without thinking. Vaughn's stride faltered slightly. "Yes, I suppose so." They walked in silence for a moment, the autumn night crisp around them, stars brilliant overhead in a way they never appeared in Boston's smoke-filled skies. "Victor would have disappointed you," Vaughn said suddenly. "Not just with the ranch, but as a husband, he wasn't." He struggled for words. "He wasn't constant." "And you are." The words slipped out before Eliza could stop them. Vaughn stopped walking, turning to face her fully. In the moonlight, his expression was impossible to read. "I don't make promises lightly, Eliza. When I give my word, I keep it." The intensity in his voice made her breath catch. For a suspended moment, she thought he might say more, might bridge the careful distance they had maintained. Instead, he simply offered his arm again and continued walking. At her cottage door, he bid her good night with formal courtesy, but his eyes lingered on her face in a way that warmed her despite the chilly evening. Eliza watched him escort Sarah to the schoolhouse before closing her door, her emotions in tumult. She was developing feelings for Vaughn Parker, feelings that went far beyond gratitude or friendship. But was she ready to risk her heart again so soon after Victor's deception? And even if she were, what reason did she have to believe Vaughn shared those feelings? His kindness might be nothing more than the fulfillment of a promise to a dying friend. November brought early snows and shorter days. The school continued, though attendance became more sporadic as winter weather made travel difficult for the outlying families. Eliza found herself with additional responsibilities as Sarah fell ill with a persistent cough that kept her bedridden for days at a time. "It's nothing serious," Sarah insisted when Eliza expressed concern. "Just my annual winter affliction. It will pass." But as the cough worsened and Sarah grew visibly weaker, Eliza's worry increased. She took over more teaching duties and cared for Sarah in the evenings, preparing broths and herbal teas from recipes the local women recommended. Vaughn visited daily, his concern for his sister evident in the tight lines around his mouth and the way he paced the small quarters above the schoolhouse. One evening in early December, after checking on Sarah, he followed Eliza back to her cottage. "Doc Sanders says it's settled in her chest," he said, his voice rough with worry. "He's given her medicine, but she needs rest and warmth." "I've been keeping the stove going day and night," Eliza assured him, "and making sure she drinks plenty of liquids." Vaughn ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Eliza had come to recognize as a sign of his distress. "Sarah's all the family I have left. If anything happened to her—" "Nothing will happen," Eliza said firmly, reaching out to touch his arm without thinking. "She's strong, and she has both of us caring for her." He covered her hand with his own, the warmth of his touch spreading through her. "Thank you, Eliza. I don't know what we would have done without you these past months." The simple sincerity in his words touched her deeply. This was the difference, she realized, between Victor's elaborate promises and Vaughn's quiet reliability. One had offered her a fantasy, the other offered solid, dependable reality. As December progressed, Sarah slowly improved, though she remained too weak to resume full teaching duties. Eliza managed the school alone, surprising herself with her growing confidence in the classroom. The children responded well to her guidance, and even the older students showed her a respect she hadn't anticipated. Christmas approached, bringing with it preparations for the school pageant, a tradition Sarah insisted must continue despite her illness. Eliza threw herself into the arrangements, helping students memorize poems and carols, creating simple costumes from donated fabric, and transforming the schoolroom with evergreen boughs and paper stars. 3 days before Christmas, as Eliza was putting the finishing touches on the schoolroom decorations, Vaughn arrived with a small pine tree strapped to his saddle. "Sarah mentioned you never had a proper Christmas tree in Boston," he said, looking almost shy as he carried it into the schoolhouse. "No, we didn't," Eliza confirmed, touched by the gesture. In the crowded tenement there had been no space for such luxuries, and after her parents' deaths, Christmas had become just another working day. Together they set up the tree in the corner of the schoolroom, securing it in a bucket of sand. Vaughn produced a small bag of ornaments, wooden stars, pine cones dipped in wax and strings of dried berries. "Sarah and I made these over the years," he explained. "Christmas was always important to our mother." As they decorated the tree, their hands occasionally brushed, sending that now familiar warmth through Eliza. She found herself stealing glances at Vaughn's profile, admiring the strong line of his jaw, the way his usually serious expression softened when he spoke of family traditions. "What will you do for Christmas?" she asked, hanging a wooden star on a high branch. "Usually Sarah and I have a quiet dinner, exchange small gifts." He hesitated. "This year we hoped you might join us." "I'd like that very much," Eliza said softly. When the tree was decorated, they stood back to admire their handiwork. In the gathering dusk, with only lantern light illuminating the schoolroom, the simple tree seemed magical. "Thank you," Eliza said, turning to Vaughn. "This is the nicest Christmas gift I can remember receiving." Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a lowering of guards. "Eliza," the schoolhouse door banged open, admitting a flurry of snow and several excited children who had come early for the evening rehearsal. The moment shattered, Vaughn stepped back, his expression closing again. "I should check on Sarah," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Good luck with the rehearsal." The Christmas pageant was a resounding success, with every child in Timber Creek participating and the entire community turning out to watch despite the bitter cold. Sarah, bundled in blankets, sat in the front row, her face glowing with pride as her students performed. Afterward, there were refreshments and an exchange of simple gifts, handmade items and practical offerings that reflected the frontier community's values. Eliza received several touching presents from her students, a hand-carved wooden pencil box from 10-year-old Thomas Jenkins, a sampler stitched by the Henderson girls, and various preserved goods from parents grateful for her dedication to their children's education. On Christmas Day, she joined Vaughn and Sarah for dinner at Vaughn's ranch. She had visited only once before and was struck again by the contrast between his property and Victor's failed homestead. Where Victor's cabin had been ramshackle and neglected, Vaughn's was solid and well-maintained. The main room was spacious, with a stone fireplace, comfortable furniture, and shelves lined with books, evidence of a man who valued both physical comfort and intellectual pursuits. Sarah insisted on preparing the meal despite her lingering weakness, though she allowed Eliza to help with the vegetables and baking. Vaughn contributed a roast goose he had hunted specifically for the occasion, and the three of them worked together in comfortable harmony. After dinner, they exchanged gifts by the fireplace. Eliza had embroidered handkerchiefs for Sarah and crafted a leather bookmark for Vaughn, using skills she had learned from the practical women of Timber Creek. "It's beautiful," Vaughn said, running his finger over the intricate design she had tooled into the leather. "Thank you." "I wasn't sure what you might need," Eliza admitted, "but I noticed you always have a book nearby." "Reading keeps the winter nights from getting too lonely," he said, holding her gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Sarah presented Eliza with a beautiful woolen shawl she had knitted during her convalescence. "To keep you warm on your walks to school," she explained. Vaughn's gift came last, a small package wrapped in brown paper and string. Inside, Eliza found a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. "Vaughn," she breathed, lifting it carefully. "It's exquisite. Open it," he said quietly. Inside was a tiny, perfect sketch of the schoolhouse, rendered with remarkable detail considering its size. "Did you draw this?" Eliza asked, amazed. He nodded, looking almost embarrassed. "I wanted you to have something to remember Timber Creek by, whatever you decide about staying." The thoughtfulness of the gift moved her deeply. This was no impulsive purchase, but something created specifically for her, reflecting both her new life and Vaughn's understanding of what mattered to her. "I'll treasure it always," she said, fastening the chain around her neck, the locket warm against her skin. Sarah excused herself soon after, claiming fatigue, though Eliza suspected she was deliberately giving them privacy. Alone with Vaughn, Eliza felt a nervous anticipation she hadn't experienced since her first days in Timber Creek. "Would you like to see the rest of the ranch?" Vaughn asked. "It stopped snowing and the moon is bright enough to show the way." Bundled in their warmest clothing, they stepped outside into a world transformed by snow and moonlight. The ranch building stood in perfect silhouette against the star-filled sky, and their breath formed clouds in the crisp air. "It's beautiful," Eliza said, gazing across the snow-covered pastures to where the dark shapes of cattle huddled for warmth. "It's not much compared to some," Vaughn said, "but it's mine. Every fence post, every roof beam, I built it with my own hands." "That makes it all the more valuable," she replied. "You've created something real here, Vaughn, something that will last." They walked in companionable silence along a path he had cleared to the barn. Inside, the air was warmer, filled with the comforting smells of hay and horses. Vaughn lit a lantern, casting a golden glow over the tidy space. "This is where I come to think," he admitted, leaning against a stall where a chestnut mare nickered softly. "Some men have their saloons or their fishing spots. I have my barn." "It's peaceful," Eliza agreed, understanding the appeal of the quiet space. Vaughn turned to face her, his expression serious in the lantern light. "Eliza, there's something I've wanted to say to you for some time." Her heart quickened. "Yes. When you first arrived in Timber Creek, I helped you because I'd promised Victor I would, but that's not why I keep coming around now." He took a deep breath. "I care for you, Eliza, more than I thought possible after knowing you such a short time." Joy bubbled up within her, but caution tempered it. "Vaughn, I care for you too, but I came to Montana seeking security through marriage once before, and you know how that ended." "I'm not Victor," he said simply. "I don't make promises I can't keep. I know that." She smiled softly. "It's one of the things I admire most about you. Then believe me when I say this." He took her hands in his. "I'm not asking for an answer today. Take all the time you need. But know that when you decide what you want for your future, whether it's staying in Timber Creek or returning east, my feelings won't change." Eliza looked into his earnest blue eyes and saw something Victor's letters had never contained: truth. Vaughn Parker was offering her his heart without pretense or exaggeration, allowing her the freedom to choose without pressure. "Thank you," she whispered, squeezing his hands, "for understanding that I need time." He nodded. Then slowly, giving her every chance to step away, he bent and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss as gentle as it was brief. When he pulled back, his eyes searched hers, looking for any sign of regret or discomfort. Instead, Eliza found herself rising on tiptoe to initiate a second kiss, this one lingering longer, expressing the feelings she wasn't yet ready to put into words. When they parted, she felt a sense of rightness, of coming home after a long journey. The remainder of the winter passed in a gentle courtship that respected Eliza's need for caution while allowing their feelings to deepen naturally. Vaughn visited the schoolhouse regularly, often staying for dinner with Eliza and the now recovered Sarah. Sometimes he brought small gifts: a book of poetry, fresh eggs from his hens, a jar of honey from a neighbor's hives. Other times, he simply offered his company and his steadfast attention to her thoughts and concerns. In turn, Eliza found herself opening up about her past: the struggles after her parents' deaths, the harsh conditions in the factory, the desperate hope that had led her to answer Victor's advertisement. Vaughn listened without judgment, his respect for her resilience evident in his eyes. As winter yielded reluctantly to spring, Eliza faced a decision she had been postponing. Her agreement with Sarah had been for temporary employment, and with the school year ending in May, she needed to determine her next steps. Return to Boston, where no opportunities awaited. Seek employment in a larger Montana town, or build a life in Timber Creek, where she had found unexpected purpose and companionship. The answer came to her one April afternoon, as she walked alone along the creek that gave the town its name. The water ran high with snowmelt, its sound a constant rushing that matched the tumult of her thoughts. She had left Boston seeking security, believing it could only come through marriage to a prosperous man. Victor's deception had shattered that belief, forcing her to rely on her own capabilities. Yet in doing so, she had discovered strengths she hadn't known she possessed. She was a good teacher, respected by students and parents alike. She had formed genuine friendships within the community. And she had found in Vaughn a man who valued her for herself, not as a convenient solution to loneliness or household management. With sudden clarity, Eliza realized she no longer needed to choose between independence and partnership. With the right person, the two could coexist, each strengthening the other. That evening, she walked to Vaughn's ranch as the setting sun painted the Montana sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. He was repairing a section of corral fence, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms browned by the sun. He straightened when he saw her approach, setting down his hammer with a smile that warmed her more than the spring sunshine. "Eliza, this is a pleasant surprise." "I've been thinking," she said without preamble, "about what I want for my future." Vaughn's expression grew serious. "And what have you decided?" "When I came west, I was seeking security at any cost, even marrying a stranger." She took a step closer to him. "Victor's promises were broken before I even arrived, but in their place, I found something better, the chance to build a life of my own choosing." "And what are you choosing, Eliza?" His voice was carefully neutral, but hope flickered in his eyes. "A life in Timber Creek," she said softly. "Teaching children who need education, being part of a community that values hard work and honesty." She reached for his hand. "And loving a man who keeps his promises." Joy transformed Vaughn's face as he pulled her into his arms. "I was afraid you might decide to leave," he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. "That Boston would call you back." "Boston has nothing for me now," Eliza said, resting her head against his chest. "My home is here." Vaughn tipped her face up to his expression solemn despite his joy. "I want to do this properly, Eliza Sinclair." He stepped back and, to her amazement, lowered himself to one knee, still holding her hands. "I'm not a man of fancy words or grand gestures. What I offer is simple but true: my heart, my home, and my promise to stand beside you through whatever life brings. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Eliza whispered, tears blurring her vision. "Yes, Vaughn Parker, I will marry you." He rose and kissed her, this time without hesitation. A kiss that sealed their commitment and promised a future built on truth rather than fantasy. They were married in May, as the prairie bloomed with wildflowers and the town prepared for the end-of-school celebrations. The ceremony took place in the schoolhouse, decorated with spring blossoms by Eliza's students. Sarah stood as her bridesmaid, beaming with happiness for her brother and the woman who had become her dearest friend. Eliza wore a simple dress of ivory silk that Sarah and the town seamstress had helped her create, not the blue wool meant for her wedding to Victor, but something new, symbolizing her fresh beginning. Vaughn watched her walk toward him with wonder in his eyes, as if he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. I, Vaughn, take you, Eliza, to be my lawfully wedded wife, he vowed, his voice steady and sure. I promise to love, honor, and cherish you in plenty and in want, in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, as long as we both shall live. As Eliza repeated the same vows, she marveled at how different these promises felt from those made on paper by a man she had never met. These were promises made face to face, heart to heart, by a man who had demonstrated his reliability in actions as well as words. The celebration afterwards spilled from the schoolhouse into the yard, with tables laden with food contributed by the entire community. There was dancing and laughter, toasts and well wishes, the townspeople embracing Eliza fully as one of their own. "Are you happy, Mrs. Parker?" Vaughn asked as they finally rode toward his ranch, their ranch now in the golden light of evening. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Eliza replied truthfully. "When I stepped off that stagecoach 9 months ago, I thought my dreams were shattered. I couldn't see that something better was waiting. We'll build a good life together," Vaughn promised, reaching across to squeeze her hand. "It won't always be easy, ranching never is, but we'll face whatever comes side by side." The ranch house welcomed them with lanterns glowing in the windows. Sarah's doing, Eliza knew, a loving touch to make their homecoming special. Inside, fresh flowers stood on the table, and a wedding quilt made by the women of Timber Creek adorned the bed. "Welcome home, Eliza," Vaughn said, lifting her over the threshold with strong, gentle arms. "Home," she echoed, the word filled with all the security and belonging she had crossed a continent to find. In the years that followed, their partnership flourished like the land they tended together. Eliza continued teaching, eventually taking over the school when Sarah married a widowed rancher with 3 children of her own to raise. Vaughn expanded the ranch, adding land and cattle as their prosperity grew, always making decisions together with Eliza as a full partner. Their family grew too, first with the birth of their son James in 1880, followed by daughter Margaret 2 years later, and finally young William in 1885. The children thrived in the freedom of ranch life, learning both practical skills from their father and academic knowledge from their mother. On their 5th wedding anniversary, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains, Eliza thought about the twist of fate that had brought her to this moment. Victor Prescott's broken promises had seemed like disaster at the time, yet they had led her to authentic happiness with a man who understood that true security came not from grand declarations, but from quiet, consistent actions. "What are you thinking about?" Vaughn asked, his arm warm around her shoulders. "About promises," Eliza said, leaning against him. "About how losing what I thought I wanted led me to what I truly needed. I'm grateful every day that you stayed in Timber Creek," Vaughn said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "That you gave me the chance to prove not all men break their promises. And I'm grateful you were the kind of man who keeps his," Eliza replied, turning to meet his gaze, still as blue and steady as the day they met. "Even ones made to a friend who couldn't hold you to them." Their lips met in a kiss that held all the passion of new love, tempered by the deeper connection of years together. As the stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky, Eliza Parker knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home not in a place, but in the heart of a man whose promises, unlike the broken ones that had brought her west, would endure for all the days of their lives.